welcome to IndiNations, 7 Generations Investing. I'm Jeremy Bryan, and this is powered by IndiWealth. Today, we're going to talk about investment consistency through elections. Really, it's talking about staying the course during a period of change. For many tribal organizations right now, tribal governments, they're going through an election cycle, either just passed or upcoming. So I thought it was interesting just to have a conversation about that today, is that, there is nothing wrong. And in fact, it's a point of sovereignty, and being a sovereign nation is having elections to determine who your leadership is going to be. But there is some level of consistency that you want to maintain if you are going to maintain an investing profile for generations. Again, we talked about the tribal paradox in one of our earlier podcasts with regard to investing for 7 generations in election cycles that can often be 2 and 4 years in length. And, there is a paradox there. But we're going to talk about today some ways to maybe get around that and have a discussion about keeping consistency throughout that, even as the batons change from one leader to another. So let's start with this, that the constant is change. In sovereign governments and tribal governments especially, elections are recurring and can have a significant influence on your future direction. It just is part of the process. And that's absolutely fine, because election change, in my opinion, is a healthy sign of sovereignty and self-governance, is that people elect their leaders to make decisions that affect their future. That's absolutely fine. That's what you're there to do. But that transition component and the transition gaps from one leader to the next, whether that is because of decisions or whether that's because of, the people's need for change, that transition can create some financial risks that you have to understand and try to do some things to prevent. And I think those risks can be reduced through proper planning and procedure. I think that's the way you really develop a consistent investment plan that continually goes on the missions that you're trying to accomplish, but also alleviates some of those risks from that transitional element that can happen from just, the data and communication gaps. One person comes in with less information than the outgoing person. And how do we alleviate that? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So again, those election results can create potential changes, and there's a lot of different avenues of potential changes that can be risks to a consistent investment strategy. And the first and foremost is obviously leadership and leadership style. When you have a transition of leadership, usually there's a reason around that, right? Is that the people want something different, and whatever that may be, or they want a different personality on there. And either way, that leadership transition can create a style difference that creates some potential changes for how the investment landscape and what the mission is going forward. And so you have to understand that that is part of the transitional component that you have to understand and prepare for. Adjusted priorities fits right in with that, is that a new leader comes in and they have a certain platform that they want to accomplish. You go into this with the expectation of leading your people going forward, which is absolutely fine. That's what you should be there for. So there are going to be priorities that may shift as a result. You need an investment policy and an investment strategy that can align itself and staying consistent with the broader mission of expanding prosperity for your people, but adjusting for priorities as needed. The investment committee is absolutely part of the solution of how do we direct the investments in the proper fashion to accomplish the priorities and the leadership's wishes. And there may be some change and fluctuation in there, and understanding those, again, the communication gaps that can come from a result of that is something you have to understand. And then, people's styles on the committee may be different as well, and how they see how this actually should be executed could be different going forward. Asset utilization on the right-hand side there is much more around, okay, we have a plan, we have our priorities, we have the committee set. Now, how are we utilizing those assets in the proper fashion? We have, revenue coming in from infrastructure, from gaming, from hospitality, whatever that may be. How are we, and we're developing more and more assets on a daily basis through the things we're doing. How are we utilizing those in the proper fashion, in the best fashion for what we see as the way to prosper over a longer period of time. And so utilizing those can create changes as well. I think the communication gaps, I discussed that a few times. That's more in the investment committee, is that, outgoing people know what, they've been in the day-to-day operations for some time. And whether you have a CFO or a finance director that is not elected, but is an official, there can still be some communication gaps as the people coming in get brought up to speed and the people outgoing have expertise that they need to deliver on. And so if there's no process within there, sometimes you can have gaps in communication that lead to less favorable outcomes. And lastly, the advisor relationships is a lot of these may be determined by the outgoing leaders, and the people coming in may have a different philosophy and a different strategy, or a different people that they feel comfortable in using. And so that can create some disruption as well. So all of these can be disruptible forces, if you will. But in my opinion, and the right structure is in place, all of these are manageable. You can make adjustments to investment policies. You can utilize assets in a better fashion or a more optimal fashion for what you're trying to accomplish. And the advisor relationship should always be part of a review process anyway. So I think all of these are manageable with the proper level of governance set in place. So I think you develop consistency. In our opinion, the best way to develop consistency is through the Tribal Treasury Model. Again, the Tribal Treasury Model is pretty simple. It aligns your mission to a timeline and a time horizon to accomplish those missions. And it sets the investment structure based upon those time horizons to achieve them. And so again, for operating and rainy day holdings, the real safe stuff that you need to be there, that's your 0 to 24 months. That's an ultra safe asset allocation profile. For your reserve and capital projects from 1 to 7 years, the known knowns, if you will, the things that you want to do and that either you're in progress of doing or you have a plan for, that's 1 to 7 years. And that tends to be more of a balanced hybrid type of approach between some income generation, some growth, but also some preservation capability and really monitoring for downside risk in the market. Your long-term assets, that's where you're going to grow. That's your perpetual funds, if you will, or your recurring streams that you want these assets to compound over a longer period of time so that you can do more and you can expand your mission, you can serve more people, you can do the things you want to do. And that's a 7-year time frame where, again, it allows you to take more risk there because you know you've got your short-term and your intermediate term needs covered. Again, in our opinion, this structure provides mission clarity. It protects your sovereignty and self-sustainability. And it also, again, ensures if you're setting this up and you're understanding where you are and what your investments need to be covering, it ensures the investments align with the mission that you've set forth. And so establishing consistency through this can be very translatable and very easily communicated to new leaders coming in as here is what that, here's the bucket we have for the next 0 to 24 months. Here's the bucket we have for the health project that we're doing right now. In the next 3 years, we need financing for this, this, and this, and we need assets for this time frame. And then here are the things that we're doing from Miners Trust. Here's what we're doing for a bereavement fund, whatever that may be, where we need a spending component of this, but really we want to grow these assets over a longer period of time. And you have it aligned in that fashion, that reduces those communication gaps because now you have a structure in place that you can communicate easily to new leadership coming in. I think you should document the consistency, and then in consistency documented means the investment policy statement. And I've talked about this before. We did a video completely on the investment policy statement alone and why I think it's so important. But I'll just review here is that, again, continuity across leadership changes. That's the very first one that I was talking about before. And I've talked about it in prior videos, but this is where this component comes into play is you have an investment policy statement that matches and mirrors what you're trying to accomplish and what the roles and responsibilities for everyone are. If you have that, that's a document that can be given to new leaders right at the outset. They can review it and understand what you've been trying to accomplish already And maybe the process for reviewer changes if the mission is going to be adjusted down the road. Discipline during times of market stress, I think that's absolutely essential. Is that, again, you have usually an asset allocation range that you're comfortable with. And when new leadership comes in, sometimes they don't understand that fully, and especially get caught up in, hey, potential what's going on with the markets, and that natural risk aversion that I've talked about before in tribal governments can really often, especially with new leaders, may resurface again. And so the investment policy statement allows for discipline during those times. Accounting and evaluating progress, again, accounts for it in the effect of, we know how we're measuring this going forward. And that's not just a benchmark, but does that benchmark actually suit what we're trying to do from our tribal treasury model, again, from the time perspective that we're trying to put into place. Mission alignment, and then documentation that supports your fiduciary duty. Again, new leaders come in, are fiduciaries. They are acting in the best interest of their constituent base, and they're acting in the best interest of the mission of the people going forward. And so these really do align very well, from having a policy statement that directly addresses those issues and documenting it so you can show that you are conducting and doing your fiduciary duty. So let's talk about the tribal investment transition checklist here. This is a way, in my opinion, that you can kind of set up the process to really doing a proper transition and a proper passing of the baton. You start first with the treasury structures. How are we organized? Again, if you're under the tribal treasury model, you're going to have that really delineated very well. Here's our short-term needs, and here's how we're addressing those. Here's our intermediate term needs and how we're addressing those funding needs going forward. And then here's our long-term perpetual offerings or our endowments of the things that we're doing. And here's how we're invested here. And in most instances, it's going to be different accounts for each of those things. So you can show the asset base and you can show how you're invested in that fashion. Snapshot of the current balances, again, that feeds right into that. Is that, hey, here is what we've planned for via the IPS, and here's where we are right now. And here's, do we have any shortfalls or any projected shortfalls coming? How do we address that? Do we have hopefully some surplus that we can talk about realigning, expanding the mission or realigning those assets towards other initiatives as we go forward? Project timelines, again, that tribal treasury model really helps with that. But understanding and coming in and allowing a transition, and when you're going out and saying, here's what we have designed for so far, and here's the timelines that we need to know in order to continue to progress on the things we're trying to do. Spending policies and rules regarding distributions, I think that's absolutely essential. Is, hey, how are we using this money? How are we allowed to do it? Who needs to approve these kinds of things and that kind of adjustment? I think you need to know that at the outset so that the spending doesn't misalign with what the mission and the intended mission was. Key relationships and signing authority. Again, who needs to review what? Who signs off on the things we need to do? And who in those advisor relationships do we need to contact to make sure that we're still progressing in the same fashion? I think that's very important. And then lastly, your reporting requirements. What is due and when? Giving a delineated time frame. By conducting all of these things, and none of these live in an isolated bucket, I think it's a checklist that each of those should be aligned in some proper fashion in order to properly transition going forward. But knowing all of this and having the infrastructure set up, and if you're a leader coming in and understanding maybe some of this isn't already set up, maybe that's one of the first initiatives, is setting, hey, how do we do this so it's sustainable going forward? This is a checklist, and it's by no means exhaustive. And I think each of these would have subpoints that we could certainly discuss. But from this perspective, if you can set this up, you've really set up the capability of not only sustaining your own leadership, but also as that leadership transitions, which it eventually does in one way, shape, or form, you can properly pass the baton to the next person so that you can continue on the path of exceeding and growing your mission over a longer period of time. So for new leaders, what I recommend is curiosity before action. I think that's a way that, as a new leader coming in, you were elected to lead. And that is something you are fiduciarily bound to do, is act on the behalf of your constituents. And I think this is how, in my opinion, this is how you start that process very well, is understanding where you are now before trying to make changes about where you want to be. So it really kind of starts with just a curiosity, is what are we doing? So a starting process could be, again, if there is an investment policy statement in place, reviewing that for procedures and processes. How are we doing this before? And how are we delineating how we're invested? Who is responsible for those kinds of things? If there's no investment policy in place for an initiative you want to do, then it could be even taking a step back and constructing one, and really developing a relationship with the people that can help you on that path. But I think if there is one in place, reviewing for the IPS for processes and procedures, understanding how the mechanism works now and maybe how it needs to be changed and what's the review process for that going forward. Confirm spending authority and withdrawal rules. I talked about that before, but just understand what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do under the current structure at this point right now, and does that fit what you're trying to accomplish going forward. I think this one makes a lot of sense, is that, Indian country tends to have a lot of outside expertise that is trying to provide value to your leadership structure. And so take advantage of that. Schedule meeting sessions with the existing vendors and advisors, and maybe even some outside vendors and advisors too, and saying, hey, here are the things that I see as maybe gaps in what we want to accomplish that we don't have right now. How could we do that in the best fashion and set that up going forward? I think external expertise can be utilized there to get you ramped up faster. And that's what they should be there for. Is those meeting sessions should be an absolutely essential part of what they're doing for you, because that's how they add value over a longer period of time, is listening to what you want to accomplish and trying to provide a roadmap to get you there. And lastly, try to understand the full picture before action. Again, all of these things kind of coagulate together to a certain extent. And so understand the umbrella of it over, instead of saying, oh, here's the one thing I want to do. Let's do that first and then the buy. Because a lot of these things can coalesce and really kind of combine to give you a better understanding of, okay, so here's where we were, here's the path, here's the mission, here's how we're delineated from an asset base. Okay, I understand what's going on now. Now I want to use my leadership capabilities and the things that people elected me for to make the adjustments necessary to get us mission aligned with what we want to accomplish as a new leadership structure. And so I put, you were elected, hired to lead. And I wanted to put hired in there because finance directors and CFOs are often not part of the election process. And that's absolutely fine. There should be some delineation in certain regards. But you were also, you were hired to lead. You were hired to be facilitating what the tribal leadership is trying to accomplish. And so in either fashion, good governance is the method to being that fiduciary for your constituent base and for your tribal, your tribal citizens. I really think that setting up good governance and setting up communication platforms so that you can relay what you're doing under that tribal treasury model or whatever model you may choose, whatever method that you can do to communicate to your citizens that you elected me to do this, I am trying to accomplish this. Here is the method I'm trying to get there. I think this really can help on the investing side by setting up in this fashion. Lastly, on the consistency side is process consistency. And I think a treasury calendar makes a lot of sense for this. And once you set up the infrastructure, you do a lot, I always say do a lot of homework up front. Because once you can do the homework up front, then you can set up a recurring structure and a process going forward that doesn't allow you to have to recreate the wheel every time that you're trying to do something. And so I think setting up a monthly, a quarterly, and an annual set of responsibilities makes a lot of sense, because on the monthly side, it should be just kind of status quo. Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? Are we staying on track? And I think operating cash flow. Do we have the cash we need to cover for the next few months? And if we do not, where are we getting those assets from? Just making sure that your cash flow is covered and that the essentials are going to be taken care of. Again, budget analysis, update, liquidity check, all of that kind of goes under that same thought of, hey, in the next few months, do we have everything we need to take care of what we've said we were going to do? I think that's your monthly status and quote and update checks. And that's probably more your accounting type of things and your CFO making sure that the day-to-day blocking and tackling is taken care of. But as a new leader coming in and just ensuring that that is taking place, you could have a once a month meeting with them and just say, hey, what's the plan? Are we still on track? Is there anything we need to be looking at to make sure we're, if something has come up, if a contingency is needed, what do we need to do? I think that can be done once a month and should be absolutely fine to making sure you're staying on track. On the quarterly side, it's a little bit more robust but if you're doing that on a monthly basis, now it's talking much more about progress. Are we maintaining our progress? Are we, doing a performance review and update? Are we consistently doing what we're trying to do? And it doesn't mean you have to make drastic changes on a quarterly basis. In fact, I would recommend against that. But you do want to understand if the trends have changed or something has changed to understand, okay, there's been big changes, with regard to the global markets, with regard to our investment, with regard to the timelines of things. Are we still on progress to meeting everything we need to be doing? And I think that's where your committee review comes into play. And just, again, your priority situation, just your progress check on that. I think that's what your quarterly. And again, when I say quarterly update, especially when you have an external advisor relationship, this should be not just, oh, the market did this and this, and we outperformed this, we underperformed this, and see you next quarter. I don't think that adds a ton of value. I think it's, yeah, the market did this, and here's where we are, but here is how that affected our plan and progress going forward. We assign, if the market had a difficult period during that quarter, hey, we've already had those contingency plans in place. We are still absolutely on track, even as we've had a temporary dip. If you're having a strongly sustainable and growing market, and you have a surplus as a result of that, how do we realign that? Should we rebalance to make sure we're still in alignment with what our mission is? And if we have a windfall of something, how do we adjust it so that we can best utilize those assets going forward? An annual basis, I think, is much more of what I call the step back. Take a step back and just take a look at the broader picture. Are the missions that we've set forth through the IPSs that we've developed and the things we're trying to do, does that still align with what we're trying to do as a leadership structure going forward? Does that make sense for us? Do we need to adjust something going forward? Is there a project in place that we need to accommodate for because we think it's the best opportunity for our people going forward? I think this is where on an annual basis you can do that and have that broader scope conversation. And once that's been delineated and figured out, then, okay, what does the investment policy statement currently tell us and what do we have to do for an adjustment? Again, I put here as necessary because maybe there's nothing. Maybe there's nothing you need to do as a result. But this is the time to make those kinds of conversations. This isn't as much of a time to having that monthly, are we good for the next couple of months? I think the annual meeting should be much more broad in focus and saying, are the things we are trying to accomplish still what we were trying to do? And are we on the right track to doing that? So I'll close with a 7 generations reminder. I love this quote. It's, native nation building is aggressive assertions of sovereignty backed up by capable institutions. I think that's absolutely, setting up self-governance and setting up your structure so that you maintain sovereignty and you're self-sustainable over a longer period of time should be the goal of any tribal organization. And I think absolutely capable institutions and documented processes is the way to get there. In my opinion, treasury management is one of the most important responsibilities because it funds your essential services. It supports stability in time, especially when, if things are going poorly, unemployment is rising fast and your people need more assistance. If you set up your treasury management in the proper fashion, you can be the back support to allowing your people to work through this over a longer period of time and more prosperous on the other end of it when things come back. And again, it creates long-term opportunity for future generations. 7 generations investing. This is not 2 to 4 year election cycles. This is long-term approaches, and treasury management is absolutely essential in that process. So I hope this was helpful. This is part, again, of our treasury playbook for tribal nations. If you want a copy, it will be downloaded. They'll be in the description below, where we'll have our resources page where you can find this and other resources. But also, if you need any more information or a slide on here piqued your interest and you want to know more about it, give us a call or hit us in the comments here below and we'll have a conversation. So that's all we have for this week. Tune in next week where we'll have our next hot button topic. But until then, thank you very much and take care of yourselves.